Ich freue mich jetzt sehr, dass ich Professor Dr. Ashok Gangadin aus Haverford bei Philadelphia hier zum Einführungsvortrag begrüßen darf.
I'm very pleased that I can introduce Professor Ashok Gangadin from Haverton near Philadelphia.
Ich freue mich ganz besonders, dass du gekommen bist, Ashok. Und als ich dich zum ersten Mal getroffen habe in dem Wochenende im Club von Budapest, hatte ich dich gleich in mein Herz geschlossen.
I'm very happy you are here, and at that weekend I first met you in Budapest at that club in Budapest. I really embraced you in my heart, took you into my heart.
Später merkte ich dann erst, was für ein berühmter Mann du bist.
Only later I discovered what a famous man you are.
Professor Ashok Gangadin ist Professor an einer Universität in der Nähe von Philadelphia und unterrichtet dort schon seit 40 Jahren.
Professor Ashok Gangadin is a professor at the university near Philadelphia, and he teaches there for about 40 years.
Er tut das, er ist Philosoph von seinem Fach her und tut das, was viele Philosophen vermeiden.
From his studies, he is a philosopher, and he does something which many philosophers try to avoid. Right.
Nämlich, er schließt das Spirituelle in das Philosophische mit ein.
He includes spirituality into philosophy.
Und was ihm ganz besonders wichtig ist, wie er mir erzählte, ist eine Grammatik zu finden, eine Grammatik des Absoluten.
And what's very important for him is he's going to look or find a grammar of the absolute.
Und zwar eine Grammatik, die uns zeigt, in welcher Weise das Absolute oft hier in dem Relativen hier auf der Erde stattfinden kann.
A grammar which shows us how the absolute can happen here on earth, in our relative world.
Ashok ist nämlich der Meinung, dass Vergebung, so etwas wie Vergebung, nie aus der relativen Welt kommen kann.
Ashok is convinced that forgiving can't come out of the relative world.
Sondern dass Vergebung immer nur aus dem Absoluten kommen kann, aber daraus entstehen dann in der Regel ungeheuer viele Missverständnisse.
Forgiving can only come out of the absolute, but this may lead to misunderstandings.
Dass man nämlich einfach das Absolute hier in das Relative überschreibt. Dass man das, was Gott gilt, dann einfach ins Ego überschreibt.
So that's what the laws for the absolute will be transferred into the relative. That means that you can't just download God's will to your ego will.
In diesem Sinne möchte ich dich jetzt bitten, Ashok, deinen Vortrag zu beginnen.
In this sense, I want to ask you please to start your lecture, your talk.
Thank you very much. I don't know if you can, is this on? Can you hear me all right? As you can see there, can you hear me? As you can see, there's a flip chart, and I'm going to be using it to visualize, to really compress 3,000 years of evolution on the planet in very precise ways, to create a PowerPoint as I speak. And I'm very mindful that our translator is dancing with me, so I must take signals to make sure I don't go too fast, because I have so much to cover. And first of all, I'm honored to be here at the 9th EUROTAS International Conference. As you'll see as I speak, for me, EUROTAS is holding a very important space on the planet. And the conception of this particular conference, the naming of it, towards an enlightened global culture, and trying to understand conflict, terror, love from a transpersonal point of view, is a high point in our evolution on this planet. We all know that we're at a great cusp of shifting, and everything's at stake. Our survival and sustainability as a human family on the planet is in the offing. So as I proceed, I really like very much and appreciate the way Victor and Ingo worded and framed this particular meeting about the depth of violence in our culture. We all know that it's all around us. And we really need to understand, why is it in every aspect of our lives? Despite the great wisdom teachers we've had for millennia on the planet, who've been teaching us the way out of that kind of violence, to compassionate culture, to civilized culture, and to becoming real human beings, mature human beings, it appears that we're still held in place by patterns of consciousness that continue to dominate our personal, cultural, and institutional lives. So bear with me. I hope you can see this. Everyone can see this. I'm just going to put up some visuals to try and see what is the wisdom of our great wisdom teachers. I don't think we've seen very clearly global wisdom. And there's a good reason for that. Because we humans are always raised in a certain cultural setting. And after Kant and Husserl and Heidegger and Hegel and many of our great German philosophers, Wittgenstein, we know that we are shaped in a lens of the mind, L-E-N-S, lens, like a camera lens. So when we're raised in our culture, in utero, even before we come into the world, we're being shaped in how to see reality, how to see ourselves in our cultural grammar. And unfortunately, our education system doesn't really help us clearly to see what is the lens I have if I'm raised in the Christian world, in the European setting. How can I cross into the Hindu world? Can I? Is it possible for me, if I'm steeped deeply in the Christian vocabulary and mental ecology, is it possible for me to morph my mind into a very different mind space in which I can understand karma and dharma and yoga and samsara? Very different concepts. Can I enter the Chinese mind and understand the Tao and Qi, yin and yang, and acupuncture? Can I go into the Buddhist mind and understand shunyata, emptiness, where the true self is empty, anatta? How can I process shunyata? And if I'm a scientist and I'm speaking the language of physics, very high-level language, coming out of Einstein's relativity, can I really enter into the Islamic mind and so forth? How do we cross our worlds? We're not educated very well to even recognize the lens we have and how to detect and decode our mental ecologies, much less how to dance and move between them into a common ground. We don't even have a common ground. If we look and step back at the vast evolution of cultures and wisdom traditions on our planet over the last, just to pick an arbitrary date, 3,000 years. And I think that EUROTAS and the whole enterprise of transpersonal psychology is holding a vital space in this ultimate mystery story that's unfolding. So I'm trying to pace myself here. So this is what I'm going to try to show and visualize with me. This is a meditation. I may be a professor, but I'm also a recovering logician, so that I'm not giving a lecture, but I'm attempting to do a meditation with you, please. Because I'm trying not to talk about global wisdom, but to try and bring it into the room, to build on the beautiful sounds we heard that open the energy for us to experience this. So this is an experiential meditation together. But if we step back from particular views, whether Christian or Chinese or Hindu or Buddhist or Lakota, indigenous, African, whatever the cultural lens is, and open up a global space, truly open it, we begin to see astounding patterns in our human evolution that we could not have seen if we stayed in a more local lens. So we find in the Chinese classical culture the Tao. I hope you can see that. Tao. Lao Tzu begins this great book. The Tao that is named is not the Tao. There appears to be a space, just mark it like a screen of our awareness, where I and all of our information, we process our world in this space. It's a mind operating system. It's a technology of mind. And really the ultimate technology is not just the technologies we produce, such as internet and electricity and jets and bombs and all of the vast technology. That's the result of a deeper technology, which is how we use our minds. And our great wisdom teachers, I'm going to be gesturing here and here to draw the contrast. Our great wisdom teachers have taught us that the ultimate technology is the technology of consciousness. And an axiom of global wisdom is that we are as we mind. We make our worlds and our realities with our technology, our mind processing. So I'll be constantly trying to help us see the difference between this profound space and the language that's spoken here by our wisdom teachers and traditions across the planet. And this space, which is the more everyday mental processing, where we process information in this space. Logic is a very high science, as you know. And the whole European logic, being born with Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, is that to think is to predicate. Subject and predicate. To think is to predicate. We learn when we enter philosophy and logic. And the laws of thought are the laws of how do we put the information together to make sense and meaning. Socrates is a man. Socrates is Greek. Greeks are mortal. All of the information is processed, and we try to get the laws of thought. But we don't realize there's a deeper logic in this space. That Jesus is speaking, that Abraham is discovering, that Lao Tzu saw, that the yoga teachers and the Vedanta, Om, speaks, that Buddha discovered in his Great Awakening, that science is attempting to decode at the frontier of science at this point. These teachers who spoke this deep language were always interpreted by the only language we had, the language form that dominated our planets. And if we, as Ingo say, download this speech in our everyday level of thinking, it gets broken and distorted. And our great teachers themselves didn't really make it fully clear that this script, a holistic, powerful script, mind operating system, to tap the Word of God or the fundamental Word, cannot be processed in ordinary ways. That's why Lao Tzu begins, the Tao that is named is not the Tao. A warning. And if we stand back and see that across the planet, Om, all of Hindu wisdom is meditate on Om, not predicate on Om. This kind of thinking is not yoga wisdom. If you read Patanjali, the great yoga teacher, Patanjali Yoga Sutra, his opening sutra is Yogas Chittam Vritti Narodaha. Yoga is the silencing of predication. Yoga is the quieting of the noise of ego mind to cross into the awakened space. All of Buddha's awakening had to do with breaking this barrier and crossing into the space. Buddha's enlightenment. And Buddha called this space shunyata. Shunya in the Sanskrit is zero. And he said reality is shunyata, emptiness. This language cannot adequately work in shunyata. That's why he called it the no-self. The self, the transpersonal self, the true person is empty of this information. It is not a thing. Because the everyday self processes itself here. We make ourselves in this space of this technology. We make ourselves an object. How could we avoid it? If I came to you and say, tell me about yourself, you will say I am Ingo, I am German, I'm a psychotherapist, I was born such and such, I have children, I'm married, and all of the information that gives my ID. When we process ourselves here, we become an object with information, and that is my ID. That's who you are. And you cling to that for life because this is me. I am me. When you practice this way. And this gives birth to the ego self. And all of our great teachers knew that when we break out of this into this space of connection and become a true self, this mind operating system cannot apply. So everything turns upon making this transformation. And I would dare suggest, as I keep developing this, for the Judaic tradition of Yahweh, for the Christ, for Allah, all of these great traditions are seeking to name what is first and fundamental, the fundamental, infinite, presiding reality. So in Buddha's case, Buddha saw, when Buddha awakened, four noble truths that are four global truths. And you must know these. He was raised as a Hindu prince, but he wanted to break free from all of that Atma and Om. He wanted none of that because we tend to put it here. We say, I am Brahman. This is Om. This is my true self, the Atman, and we lose it because we download it here. Buddha saw we had to break through. So when Buddha woke up, he saw existence is suffering. It has a cause, attachment to the ego identity, which is karma. Karma is the ID information that makes the object a thing, a being. And once you become an entity, a being, a thing, a bundle of this information, even death doesn't dissolve it. We have to work it through and burn it off to realize the true core self that is a no self. The true self is a no self. And I think that EUROTAS is attempting to hold that space for the sacredness of the self understood here. The true person is not just the ego, so it's transpersonal. That's what I hear. So the third noble truth, existence is suffering. It has a cause. This is the cause, because we are creating that self. We have a choice. We don't have to be addicted to this pattern. That's the third noble truth. We have a choice in our mind operating process, in our technology of consciousness. We don't have to use the ego program and objectify ourselves in this way. And the fourth noble truth is to practice a rehab. It is a rehabilitation of the mind patterns to become an awakened, mindful being in the world. And the Eightfold Path, the 8 paths, the channels of everyday life, right action, right intention, right understanding, right livelihood, and so on. It means that if you want to break this pattern that keeps us in bondage and suffering, we must rehabilitate in every act of our life, everything we do, mindfully. And that's how we break the ego pattern and develop the pattern of shunyata. And when we cross into this great space, everything is interconnected. Buddha saw that. Emptiness, shunyata, is fullness. It's abundance. It's overflow. Because every point touches every other point. Nothing can be broken and separated in this space. Imagine what that means. It must be so powerful, this space. Every point touches every other point right now. Do we have a language capable of expressing that? This is what Buddha was attempting to open up the language of shunyata. He called it relativity, meaning relationality. Everything is relational. And the Buddhists speak of Indra's net. Reality is an infinite field, like Indra's net. Indra is a god. And you must know this. Indra's net is an infinite field of infinite points. And yet each of them is a center, and each touches the other. And each of us is a center in that field. Imagine what that means. When you become a self, the great responsibility and power that comes with holding that sacred space of being a no-self. Because that's where moral awakening and compassion comes. Because the self is always I and thou. It is always connected with the other. You can never cut it. You could never cut the I. This is artificial. This is separated. This is connected. So when you say, I am here, it's not the same as saying, I am here. And that's what compassion is. Compassion is not just an emotion that the ego has. Compassion is a higher way to be, where you experience your connectivity with each other, with the environment, with nature, with art, with sound. Everything is connected. Imagine what it means to enter this time. Time here. Every moment touches every other moment. Whereas time here is broken. Whatever we put here gets fragmented. Past is different from present, is different from future. I can be caught in my past and worried about my trauma and my suffering and my abuse. I can be obsessed with my future and my worries about getting into medical school and paying my mortgage. And speakers like the German Eckhart Tolle is speaking of the power of now. This now. If you could touch this now, where every moment touches, your whole past is with you now, and the whole future is right here now. So if you could see the coming fall, you could see the snow, you could see the spring right now. When this lens is open. The global mind. And you could see yourself in the other. And that's ethics. So compassion is when you become an awakened moral being. It's almost impossible to be a real moral being in this place. This is why geniuses like Nietzsche, in his book Beyond Good and Evil, saw that you can't be a true mensch by following the rules mindlessly, like a cultic slave. He called it a slave mind, because you don't take responsibility for your role in making your world and affirming the values that we have. So the Übermensch is the person, in Nietzsche's language, who dares to step out of the box, to ratify ethics and the moral law. Our great Kant saw the problem as well. Kant saw that if we were only the ego psychology, then all the laws of nature will control and we will have no freedom. So Kant, in his genius, saw that the moral self is the noumena, the Ding an sich. The Ding an sich cannot be spoken and named. The everyday self that we can study as an object is not the moral self. So Kant saw phenomena, noumena. But for Kant, the Ding an sich was off limits to thinking and language. We had to be silent. And this is why you would get a remark such as Wittgenstein at the end of his Traktatus book, Wovan man nicht sprechen kann, darüber muss man schweigen. That's the noumenon. You cannot speak. And yet it's our moral self. I'm giving you examples from history to show our greatest minds have been trying to get this language, but because we didn't have it yet, we fell back here. And it got lost. I'm deeply moved by Heidegger, whom I teach as well, Martin Heidegger from Freiburg. I hope to visit his hut. I know that there are problems in his past. But when he said in his Sein und Zeit that philosophers have been obsessed with being, Sein, but how about Dasein? And he switched the focus here. I need a language of Dasein. Dasein is prior to Sein. And coming from Husserl, that open existentialism and phenomenology. But it goes back to Descartes. Again, Descartes is almost tragic, René Descartes. Because he saw that everything that he believed could be wrong. In his Meditations on First Philosophy, that's the name of his book, Meditations on First Philosophy, he saw that all of his mathematics, all of his science, all of his religion could all be questioned. He was shocked. What if there's a demon deceiving him? Because he was separated from the information. The thinker was broken from the information. That's what ego mentalism does. It separates the thinker from the information. And a demon of deception can always trick you to say, you think it's right, but it's wrong. So we didn't get Descartes. Descartes was saying, if I go here, I cannot trust it. I can doubt everything. So when he said, I am, he dropped his mind, he dropped his body, he dropped his entire story, his ID, and he was naked. He had no more information. He couldn't go back there because the demon rules. And he said, I am. Cogito ergo sum. What am I know not. But that I am is absolutely certain. Let me proceed cautiously, not to confuse myself with something else that I'm not. But of course, the only language Descartes spoke was this one. And so we downloaded it right here, and we interpret him there, and we lost it. It was an opening for Europe where we might have gone more deeply. And Edmund Husserl saw it in his Cartesian meditations, his Cartesian ideas, where started phenomenology. He said, something important happened when we moved to the witnessing self, and bracket that. And that opened up phenomenology. And Heidegger, Sartre, Gadamer came out of Husserl's beginnings. And as you know, after Heidegger attempted in Sein und Zeit to articulate Dasein, he gave up his project. It failed. It wasn't working. But in his mature career, he tried to open up another language, Gelassenheit, where everything regions, where language is a house of being. And he warns us that we're meditative beings. And the technology that dominates our lives can take us down. So in his later career, he turns to Hölderlin, as you know, the poet, to say there's a deeper power in poetry for philosophy. I'm using these examples from our own situation here, but I could give many, many other examples. I'm going to go quickly now, more quickly. I hope you're okay. If you go into the Judaic tradition, where the whole Judaic tradition begins, with Abraham and Isaac, hear, O Israel, the Lord thy God is one. Love God with all your heart and your mind. We're called from this place to us. What does it mean to love and place first? What is first? Abraham struggled with that for all humanity, because he had his Isaac. He's an older man. He has his son, the most precious thing he could have, he thought. And yet God, Yahweh, called us all. Put what is first, first, and love it with all your heart and mind. What does that mean? It means you can't put your ego agenda first. You've got to surrender to a higher power. So all of humanity was in the balance when Abraham had to decide, do I trust my instinct of the truth of this higher call of God, or do I listen to my own ego agenda and what I want and what I love? And in that almost tragic moment when God said, sacrifice Isaac, he didn't mean, of course, kill Isaac. He mean, let him go. Because the passage from here to there is always one of letting go, surrender. Surrender your ID. Be courageous enough to let go of the ego information that you are and you believe yourself to be, but you're not. And with Jesus, when Jesus saw that we were still putting the law on stone. Jesus came to teach us that we must surrender, we must die to be born again and cross and transmutation into the place he calls it, I call it the Logos. I'll talk about that in a moment. But the breaking of the bread at the Last Supper, when he says, take this bread and make it into bread. Take this wine and make it into wine. This is the blood of Logos. This is the body of Logos. From now on, eat in this way. In everything you take, this is the food of God. We need this nourishment to live. So all of the Christ ritual is to move us from here into there. When we cross here, we can no longer separate the thinker from the language, from the world. They meet in one point. Imagine how powerful that point is. When Descartes said, I am, he was the very utterance I am. You can't separate the thinker from the thought, from the reality. They are one point. When you cross from this place of division to this place of holistic connection, all of these broken points meet in the common ground. So as my work as a philosopher and logician unfolded over 4 decades, I went to India for the first time in 1971. I grew up in the West, family from India, born in Trinidad, lived in Jamaica, went to New York as a boy, educated in Western thinking, my doctorate at Brandeis University in logic and ontology. And I discovered a deep split in logic. That was my doctoral dissertation. I knew the modern logic of Frege, the great Begriffsschrift of Gottlieb Frege, and Russell and Wittgenstein. I knew that logic, modern logic. Completely rejected the ancient, older logic of Aristotle. And I studied both of them. I studied the classical Aristotle logic that shaped all the way through Kant. Kant said that logic was completely developed by Aristotle in its final form. Hegel tried, of course, to change it, as you know. Hegel said that there's a more powerful logic of is and isn't that generated the dialectic of Geist. So a lot of attention is, can we find the right logic? So what I'd like to do to bring this together is to suggest that this space, with all of these different languages, Tao, Om, Brahman, Shunyata, Yahweh, Christ, Allah, energy, Great Spirit, Sophia, the feminine, all of these names for the first are different, but there is still a fundamental logic in this space that we have not yet seen clearly. And because of the differences of these different stories, and they really are different, because the Buddha's story is not the same as the Christ story. They're profoundly different. And they're not the same as Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. You must know the Bhagavad Gita, the great Hindu text. Arjuna, the warrior, is on the battlefield. He's about to enter a war, a violent war. A fratricide, the own family is broken. And Krishna is the voice of Om. Krishna is his charioteer. And Arjuna is broken. You always get split here. Because as a warrior, he knows he must kill. But when he looks and he sees his uncles and his cousins and his teachers and his friends, he says, I cannot kill them. I can't kill my own people. this power broke through him. His conscience, the higher self, broke through, and he got broken. Which is a good sign, because when you have your midlife crisis at whatever age, and it breaks, you're ready for the journey. So Arjuna drops his weapon on the battlefield, knowing this is suicide. If he kills his own family, he can't live. If he drops his weapon, he's dishonored himself and his reputation is ruined. He turns to Krishna and says, Krishna, help me. And Krishna is almost annoying. He's smiling at this tragic moment because he knows this is the time to take Arjuna into the high place. The first lesson of Krishna is, Arjuna, don't you realize what ego thinking is? Check it out. Stage 1. This is why you're broken and suffering, and this is why you're in a war. We don't make that connection. We don't realize that ego mentalism, the mind program, breaks, divides, polarizes. It breaks you from you. It cuts you in two. And it breaks the information down, so you're going to have enemies in war and fighting over the kingdom. It breaks up all information so that mind and body, finite and infinite, one and many, I and thou, all broken. So what I'd like to just bring together is to suggest that there is a fundamental technology here and a very different one here. And to make the outrageous claim that if you look across the planet at our personal lives, at our relationships, in our marriage, in our family, how we treat our children, how we deal with other people in a different religion, a different culture, or a different political party, or a different field of study. I'm in spirituality, you're in science. Different cultures. It's all broken and violent. And if we look at our behavioral problems in my life, my love life is not working, my spouse is an object, I love her, but I'm objectifying her. Love can't work here. Because love is not, you can't objectify the other person. You can't understand another culture if you're using your lens and processing. If I'm a Christian and I know that Jesus is the truth, and I'm listening to the Muslim or to the Buddhist or the Chinese, and I interpret them through my lens, that's not dialogue. That's monologue. That's ego-log. This is the egosphere. This is the logosphere. So let's clean this up. This is messy. I'm going to do something outrageous. This is what I'm going to do. When I present this to my students, and for 30 years I've been teaching the Bhagavad Gita, and since I only had this at the beginning, I would try to tell and interpret the text here. I would teach the Buddha text and try to explain it here. And I realized that was completely wrong, because the main point they're making is, do not stay here, wake up, become aware of what it means to use this process, and cross into the space of awakened consciousness, where you become a whole human being. They're all teaching that. My students, they would read Hermann Hesse, Siddhartha, for example. You know that book. They say, Professor Gangadine, I see this. I know I must get there. But how can I get there? What can I do to become enlightened? The more I try, the more I get stuck here. Because the more the ego tries, the more it gets pulled into the ego space. So we face a paradox. What's the trick about becoming an awakened being to cross into that? Then I point out to them, this picture is all wrong. Let's erase this picture. I use the word logos from the Greek to name the fundamental infinite force. Om, Tao, Yahweh, Allah, whatever you name it, the global logos. This line is very important. It shows the separation into this space. I began to see it was extremely important in helping students and other people to learn these two different dimensions, to mark them explicitly. So whenever you're in the ego space, mark it. Single brackets. Any word spoken from the ego mind, from the ego operating system, in this space, mark it, like quotation marks. And if you can speak this language or listen to the teachers, like Jesus and Buddha and Krishna and all of these teachers, mark it with double parentheses. This is more rigid. This is like a cut. But this is more flowing, like the infinite. So when you put a word here, it's very different. So this language is profoundly different from this one. This is ego-mentalism. And this is entering into the Logos script. And our great teachers are all speaking from this space. But what we do is this. We take that to be first, and we place it in here. This is pretty perverse. Here is EUROTAS, for example. And you marginalize it because this dominates. When in fact, this is the situation. This is global wisdom. That the ego mind can only operate within the logosphere. So whenever you have your name, when you write your name, please honestly recognize that you have an ego culture, an ego identity, and sometimes it can be multiple. Most of us have multiple worlds. I hate to take you back to this place. But imagine now all of the different worlds that are happening here that are at war. Here is idealism. Spirit is first. Here's materialism. Matter is first. Here is dualism. Here's monism. Here's all of the worlds are alternative worlds rendered here, and they can't talk to one another. And if you look at our universities and our culture, there are culture wars. Imagine then a typical American. Let's say I'm a Jew or a Christian. I really believe in God. I take the Bible seriously. In the beginning is spirit. And God created the universe. I believe that. That is one lens I have. That is one ID. Let's name it, one. But I'm also a physicist. And I know that the evidence shows that the universe started with a big bang. It's expanding. It's all energy and matter unfolding. Consciousness came later from matter, not from spirit. I believe that. That's another ID. Number two, I'm a civic American. I'm a good citizen. And the Constitution suggests that I must keep my religion out of my civic life. So I must separate my religion from my politics. And I believe that. But it hurts because my religion is saying every moment you breathe, love God. How can I leave that out of my politics? But I do it. That's a third ID. My civic life. Please, I'm making a very important point. Each ID is a different fragment of the self. Because worlds are profoundly important. At the deep ontology, my being as a Christian, my being as a scientist, my being as a civic political being. And of course, I'm seeing my therapist. trying to relieve the stress of all of this confusion. It's normal schizophrenia. To have these multiple, and I can't talk to myself. They're all broken. I don't have inner dialogue. So there's a war inside my soul. And my therapist, of course, is the Jungian. She is Gustav Jung. And she is telling me that I have anima and animus, a male and a female side. Oy vey, I'm really in trouble now. Very severe. I've got to deal with a female, on top of it. And Jung is telling me if I don't get my male and female together, I won't be an integral individual. So I'm getting even more stressed out. But fortunately, I'm doing yoga. And I'm chanting Om, and I'm doing ego yoga. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter I'm blowing it. Yoga has nothing to do with it. But it's getting me in shape, and I'm it's getting me, lowering my heart rate. And I'm losing some weight. And it's glamorous too. But it's only making it worse because my Om side is not the same like the others, and I'm still getting worse. But I have a tree-hugging friend who practices Feng Shui. And they tell me if I move my furniture around, then, So, I hope I'm not going too fast. I get carried away. But you get the picture. That's our normal life. The point I'm making is that normal schizophrenia, multiple personalities, ontologically, when you have these fragments of selves and you don't know how to dialogue, you're disintegrated. And most of us live in that normal space. Imagine how different cultures are going to dialogue with each other, or not dialogue, and the great violence that's going to happen. I'm almost finished. I hope this is making sense then. It's not a journey from here to there. But it's here already. If this is the wrong picture, if it's wrong to download the script of Logos within, I hope you see what that means. It literally means the ego couldn't ego without the Logos. You cannot ego without the Logos. You can't even pretend to have a continuous existence through time as an ego, with ego identity, were it not for the resources of the unified field of connectivity. This is where relations come from. This is where connectivity comes from. So if you're going to have an ego story, it's going to depend upon the presence of the Logos. And in any case, the Logos is the infinite field. No one can step outside of the Logos. That's our saving grace. The infinite field surrounds us and makes our life possible at every moment. And when we realize this is the way to write your name, your high self is always already ever present with you. And however rigid your identity and lens may be from your culture, it is possible to loosen it up. This is what I see EUROTAS is doing, to realize that you're already there. It's frightening because it looks as if I give up my ID, will I give up my body? No, you gain your body. Because when you drop the false body, your true body comes forth. You can really see. You can hear, as in the sound of the meditation. You can smell. You burn the incense. Everything is alive. Everything is sacred. All of nature is sacred. Beauty surrounds us. We're living in the place of goodness. Because when this opens up, I find that I and thou are linked. I and thou. And writers like Martin Buber in Ich und Du was trying to show that the I, it. When I treat another as an it, it's a violent act. We violate ourselves and the other when I objectify myself and the other. And that's what this calculus does. And that's why Kant, in his great moral treatise, saw that the moral law was never treat another person as a means to an end, but always as an end in herself. That's the noumenal self. And that's the I-thou relationship. When Martin Buber wrote I and Thou, he said there are two ways to be a human, I-it and I-thou. And who is this thou? I must stand open and drop my agenda to open space for the sacred other to show up. Of a different culture, of a different gender, a different person, including nature. This is sacred space. Everything is sacred. Every person is sacred. When we're raising our children and treating them like objects and schooling them and training their minds in this technology, our beautiful children, imagine they're born with the Logos, ready to come forth. And we download them and school them. Maria Montessori knew better in her education that the child is sacred. The classroom has to be a sacred space to allow the child to blossom, not to impose our agenda on the child. It's an act of violence. I'm taking everyday ways and showing that we violate each other, we violate ourselves. And so when Ingo and Victor say in this conference that violence pervades our culture, it's all around us. Even though we're good people, we're all good people, we have good intentions, because this is who we are. But when you're living in this technology and others are objects, it doesn't take much to have a Holocaust, ethnic cleansing, brutality to one another, gender violence, racism, sexism, and all of the kinds of ways we deal with each other in violent ways. Gandhi understood that. Nonviolence is non-objectification. And this power is tremendous. When Gandhi was attempting to challenge the British Empire in India and tap this power that he called satyagraha, truth power, that's the power of one. The power of one is impotent. Egos are not very powerful. But when we could step back from that and realize that the high self is always present, that's the transpersonal. It's ironic that I don't like that language. Because you become a person, a mensch. Here, this is the mensch. So transpersonal means trans-ego. Hold the space for the self to be. And the whole psychology and science here is profoundly different than here. And Jung was onto it, Carl Gustav Jung, to the collective unconscious. Because if we are interconnected deeply in a shared field of psyche, then we can connect in all kinds of ways that we can't even speak about here. So we have to really relook at our culture. And each of us must ask, am I egoing? Because if you are, you're contributing to the chronic patterns of violence and objectification on the planet. We can't blame Bush. Each of us has to ask, am I egoing? Am I part of the problem? Or am I selfing? Am I following the moral law? Am I following deep science? I hope you see this. Because science here is limited. Ego-mental science is limited by its lens. I had the Ptolemaic lens, I went to Copernicus. I had the Newton lens, Einstein shifted it. We're now saying, beyond Einstein, there are velocities faster than the speed of light. We can't understand black holes without blowing it away. There's a butterfly effect. Non-locality, all of that's coming from here. The universe, the field of nature, as an infinite field of connection, is non-local. That means across the distant universe, it's connected right now. And causation, linear causation here, is not the same as causation here. Holistic causation means that every point is connected with every other point and influencing it. That's why the power of one is so magnificent, because you, each of us, holds a powerful space on the planet right now. And if we could step into our power and be who we are and come to wholeness, that's the power of one that Gandhi and King and Mandela and Jesus were talking about. It's pure science. That's why Jesus said, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you can move mountains. Not this faith. It's not a belief in content, but faith that heals us. When Jesus said, go, your faith has healed him. Faith is the knowledge of yourself. It's a knowledge, daring to believe, even though you have your ID, that your higher self is right with you. It's self-confidence. Fide is belief. Confide, believing in yourself that you are there. That faith heals us and makes us whole. But if you buy this myth, and that's what you're living, then you're severed irreparably, and that's the sin line. In deep ontology, sin is severance from connection. And that's why Jesus says the wage of sin is death, and the gift of Logos is eternal life. Because if you enter into life, you break out of the body, the false body and the false mind, into mind-body. Every unit here connects. So all of those integral healers who want mind-body medicine are not seeking it here, where mind and body are dualized and separated, and we feel it in our lives. To mind-body, that is one concept, like space-time, the continuum. So this language is amazing. We're illiterate. Any word here connects with every other word within it. And Descartes was getting onto that. Because when he saw the I am, he meditated on that and saw the infinite God. The third meditation, he saw, that's the I thou. He saw that within the I already the thou is given. And the infinite thou is right here with me. So even more than I am, I thou. And from the I thou, he saw within the I that I am being. He saw that I am time. Sein und Zeit. I hope you saw that. When he says I am, I don't know what I am, but I am my thinking. Not this thinking, this thinking. But this thinking is being. My thinking is my being. I am as I mind. And in that being and thinking is time. And in time, of course, is space. And by the end of the fifth, sixth meditation, he's discovering body, nature, matter comes right out of mind. Because he was unraveling the continuum of knowledge. So as we gain literacy in this missing language, and we touch it all the time, that's what I tell my students. Since this is true, this is a very powerful influence. This is a powerful influence at all times. The high self. Imagine what psychotherapy would be if we really place our disorders here. My kids have ADD. They're distracted in school. Give them Ritalin. Or my daughter has anorexia. She has eating disorders with body image. Who is the eater? Is it the high self that's eating, which is what we're advised to do? Or is it the ego that's eating? If you want organic foods, I want a healthy diet, I'm going organic. But it's the ego that's eating rather than this self. Are you really bringing out the value of the food? Who is eating? I'm giving examples. I'm suggesting if we have been looking at our disorders simply here without any of this, you might get a distorted understanding. But if you start to look at this and say, check this out. We are connected. You Muslims, Christians, Jews, Buddhists, scientists, we're connected. We come from a common grammar. Not the Tower of Babel, but a deep common grammar of logos. And unless we can have the literacy to learn this language together in deep dialogue, so that I as a Christian can learn from you as a Muslim what you can show through your tradition of Islam, of Allah, can teach me more about my logos. Not Jesus, but Jesus. There's a world of difference between Jesus and Jesus. My brother is a fundamentalist Christian. Jesus appeared to him on the mountain in Arizona. And he said, Jesus is the only truth. And he said, Ashok, Jesus told me you will be saved. Kneel with me and accept Jesus in your heart right now. That was just before I left for India the next morning. He said, don't go to India, you will be lost. He was probably right. But I went to India because I felt that I didn't have the language yet. But I somehow knew that the infinite force has multiple authentic disclosures and revelations to humanity. And I think that's true. So when I listen to Buddha, if I'm a Christian and I can listen to Buddha, the Buddha and the Christ, that deep dialogue can augment me to know more about the power of Jesus, the Logos in the flesh. So Buddha and Jesus are different, but to understand how shunyata can help me to understand a deeper, my Jesus gets deeper and deeper. To go into deep dialogue is not to give up Jesus, but to gain Jesus. Not to give up Allah, but to gain Allah. Not to give up Yahweh or Moses and Abraham, but to gain them. Interreligious dialogue, real dialogue, doesn't diminish me, it augments me. When the scientist understands the way of nature, and I'm a Christian, I can learn, we can learn from each other. So what below is at war and violence? When you go in deep dialogue to the deeper source, to the common ground, as Victor would say, for example, and many of us say, there is common ground, global ground. And this is where global ethics is. So if we feel in Europe that the Chinese are violating the human rights of those, and they say, mind your own business, I don't want your European bunk here, right? There are fundamental global human rights. Every human being is sacred. This is where we get global ethics and global science. We're global citizens. So to sum this up, I'm suggesting that we will get a deeper understanding of the pathologies and the sources of our human dysfunctions if we understand how ego-mentalism fragments and breaks and divides and leads to 9/11s and the clash of civilizations and the breakdown of marriages and the failure of our relationships in love. Because love here, single bracket love, is not the same as love, unconditional love. If your lover, in the I-thou, in a deep dialogue dance, you and your lover are one and yet two. But if your lover is an object, if you get a Valentine's card, we have Valentines in America, and we have these cards we give to our lovers, and you go to the store and you buy one. You're the greatest thing that ever happened to me. Don't give that card. Right? If you say you're the greatest thing, you're already placing her here or him here. Not a thing. Right? So you get it, and I just want to congratulate the EUROTAS for daring to say towards an enlightened world culture, a transpersonal view of conflict, on conflict, terror, and love. That's the title of this conference. And forgiving and reconciliation on the planet. And Ingo asked, could we even imagine forgiving in the context of the Holocaust, or all of the many Holocausts? The Native Americans in America who have been violated in a kind of genocide by the whole American culture. Can there be forgiving and reconciliation there? Apartheid in South Africa, in Northern Ireland, in Palestine, Israelis in the Middle East. Can there be real forgiving? And the point is that as long as you're here, you cannot forgive truly. Forgiving begins with stepping into the open, surrendering those boundaries, and daring to have the courage to open up. And it's in this open space of unconditional love and compassion that we can have a sustainable global culture and civilization and bring the human family together. And I don't know if that's in the cards. Ingo, you have a few moments for dialogue or conversation. Can you hear me? Is this off? Oh, here we go. Are there any questions, comments? I did want to end on that note that I think that we can easily get marginalized or think of as where the press might just dismiss people who hold the spirituality, global spirituality and something like this and try to marginalize it. Don't let that happen. Because everything's at stake now on this planet. Humanity is in an evolutionary shift to come to maturity. And if you look at our great wisdom teachers, for centuries they've been calling us to be human. All of our great philosophers. If you look from Heraclitus to Derrida, and look at that story. I bring this out in one of my books coming out, to see the amazing mystery story. Can we enter the Logos finally? Almost a comedy tragedy of, in the European case, of these geniuses seeing into this place, but only having the ordinary modes of expression to express it, like Descartes and Kant and Hegel and Marx and Husserl and Heidegger and Sartre, for example. And they keep hitting the walls of this ego-mental space of mind and word. And we desperately need to finally open up the space to realize that the insights have to come in a more literate way, in the language of Logos. And those mystics who feel that, you know what, truth is off limits to language. Truth, as wovon man nicht sprechen kann, darüber muss man schweigen. That remark is giving up. That's what Wittgenstein was doing in the Tractatus. He says, you know, language is for describing the facts. But for the higher things, like ethics and so forth, we have no language, so be silent. But the Logos is the word. Om is the word. Tao is the word. The infinite word is infinite power of language. So mysticism is almost buying into ego-mentalism and saying the only language we have is the ego language. That's the only mind operating system. And don't even dare think to transgress into the space of truth. You have to be silent, right? I'm questioning that. All of our teachers question. That's why Buddha spoke from silence, but he spoke the Dharma. And Krishna spoke the Om. And Jesus spoke the Logos. And our teachers have been speaking. And we have to grow up and come of age. So please, I think EUROTAS and this enterprise, we have to be courageous and bold and not defer and be marginalized. The new culture is here. And Erwin Laszlo and the World Wisdom Council that I've been co-founding and working with so many partners, you know, the Dalai Lama, Desmond Tutu, Mikhail Gorbachev is with us on this, and Jane Goodall and Bob Thurman and Cornel West and Mangari Maathai, who just won the Nobel Prize. They're all with us, and they say it's time to enter global consciousness. And they're all different. We're all different. Jane Goodall is out in the forest of Africa and seeing the decimation of the forests and the loss of the species. And she says, we can't do that. Wangari Maathai, I'm speaking too fast. Wangari Maathai has been planting millions of trees for the deforestation, right? All of these teachers, Desmond Tutu is trying to get reconciliation and truth in South Africa, the topic that we're discussing here. The Dalai Lama, as you know, in terms of exile in Tibet, is trying to practice the Dharma of love and not be angry, but to stand in truth. These are the people working together. And Germany is so fantastic. I love German philosophy, obviously. You know, from Kant to Fichte, the Schelling, I mean, the amazing Goethe. All of the genius of the German mind and heart is amazing. And I hope Ingo will take me to Heidegger's hut before I go home. I'm teaching his book in my course right now, What Calls for Thinking. And what calls for thinking by Heidegger is just at this point. He says, we're not thinking. You scientists are not thinking. You academics, you're not thinking. What calls for thinking is so deep, we still haven't started to think. My colleagues reading this text together in my philosophy department are very angry to hear Heidegger say that, because they know they're thinking. But I suggest to them that if you listen to the wisdom of the planet, Krishna, Moses, Jesus, they're saying we're not thinking. It's time to think. Real thinking. You know, so I think that right here in Freiburg with Heidegger, whatever mistakes he may have made or not, I'm not going to judge. But in his mature career, he says, please, people, we are meditative beings, in his inaugural address. He says, and we have to go into the Gelassenheit, into the house of being. Language is the house of being. One of his books, On the Way to Language, he means this language. And that's Dasein. Not the old Dasein, the ego Dasein, but the transpersonal EUROTAS Dasein. So, danke schön. I still didn't hear from you. Would one person like to make a question, or did I provoke you? Yes. Say your name. Speak up.
I am Patrick. I would like you to talk a few words on the creative process in poetry.
The creative process in poetry. I love it. I hope you don't mind. I don't want to keep you if anyone has to leave. But I teach a course called Metaphor and Meaning. A course. And obviously I teach all of the philosophers of language. And for me, metaphor, when you use a word, logicians say that if you break the rules, you get mistakes of thinking. So we know that 7, if I say 7 is blue, it's called a category mistake, right? 7 is not a physical thing. You can't use color words. 7 is blue. And of course, lovers will know, I got the blues. Love is blue, right? So when you follow the literal rules of everyday logic, metaphor breaks out of the box. Think of Christ. Christ is an ultimate metaphor. The literal truth here is metaphoric for this. So Christ is the infinite made finite. How could that be? Christology is a miracle. Or the Trinity. What is the Trinity? How can Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, 3 be 1? You can't get that logic here. The Trinity gets broken here. So this language, like the word time, is filled with metaphoric power. So poetry is taking literal language and transmuting it. So when William Blake says, in his moment, to find eternity in an hour and infinity in a grain of sand, poetry. Right? Our great poets take language and they know the deeper grammar. So poetry is sacred. That's why Heidegger turned to Hölderlin as a model philosophy language. This language is not rich enough for expressing the power of the infinite word where everything is connected. So if we can go into this logic, language is metaphoric in power. Every word, every sign is a cosign touching every other sign. Here it's broken. These are broken words. So poets somehow know the language of love. You and I are one, and yet we're two. Strange things. The koan, the Zen koan, right? All of these aphorisms of the great wisdom teachings, they're poetics. So yes, poetry is sacred because it knows how to get out of the box and put words and stretch our minds through the power of the beauty of the words into the awakened space. I hope that helps. Yes? Please.
Do you think the communication between the personal and the transpersonal, the lower level, the upper level, is not only an arrow? Probably, and this is my question, probably the communication is an spiral.
Yes.
Do you think it is a spiral in order that create a situation that where the lower level is, the upper level must be. I repeat it.
The lower level is
Yes.
where the upper level must be.
A spiral, the communication
Yeah.
between the upper level and the lower level.
Yeah.
It's a spiral between
Yeah.
these two. It's coming in this way, okay?
Right.
Communicating both planes,
Yeah.
both sides, in
Yeah.
order that
Yes.
where the lower level is, the upper level must be.
Yes. Well said. And that has been seen in Zen philosophy. It's been seen by Nagarjuna, the great Buddhist dialectician. Because in the old picture where you have separation between samsara and nirvana, this line between samsara and nirvana, and everyone wants to go in that arrow there, you realize when you, once you cross into this space, that samsara and nirvana are in the same place. Or when Wittgenstein said in his more mature work in the Investigations, everyday language is perfect as it is. We weren't understanding the depth of ordinary language. So that the Zen master would say there are 3 stages you have to go through. I hope I'm not wasting paper here. The first one is, this is mountain. This is mountain. Mountain is not mountain. Postmodern deconstruction. There's more to mountain than meets the eye. Poetry. And then the third stage is, voila. This is mountain. So you take the same word, your point, the spiral, and you transmute it into its full power. But it's the same word. So there is it's not just a one-way arrow. It's an interplay. So how do I move from I to I? Well, the dialogue with myself. So this transpersonal psychology, right? We all know we have to have a healthy ego. If our ego is shattered, and many of us are having trouble, we're flaky, right? We're not even qualified yet to get on the journey of spiritual awakening. So we almost have psychologically in therapy, we want to strengthen the ego enough to enter into the daring, bold adventure. And so it is a give and, you're right. So we should see it more as a give and take dialogue. Yeah.
Religion, meditation, sutra, I think it's the same meaning, no? This
Yeah.
is very close.
Yeah.
We try to join, okay, to sow, because sutra means sowing.
It does. Sutra.
So in these 2 levels, no?
Yes.
In order to create, no? Probably the power, I say,
That's
the
right.
power of the upper level.
That's
Or
right.
the-
And this is a great point, because it took the Buddhist tradition centuries to come to that, because the first stage of seeing the Buddha as this yogi on the mountain who is giving truth and you're enlightened by yourself. And then the Buddhist logic realized, wait a minute, that can't be right, because if everything is interconnected, then the Buddha is always touching the suffering. There is no Buddha apart. That's the Bodhisattva. The loving Buddha who is always tied. So as long as there's suffering in the world, the Buddha is tied to that suffering. There is no enlightenment by yourself. Jesus understood that. And he saw that. He said to his disciples, when I was in prison, you visited me. When I was hungry, you fed me. And the disciples are still saying, when did we do this, Lord? When you tended to the least of mine, you tended to me. As a principle. So that you can't cut the link between samsara and nirvana. And that's why Nagarjuna said in his highest moment, and it was a bombshell for spiritual teaching, there is not the slightest difference between samsara and nirvana. Nirvana isn't over there. It's right here. So let's wake up right here. And that's our work on the planet right now, to wake up in this sacred ground of planet right here in Freiburg.
So we are here in the samsara, in the way to achieve nirvana.
Yes,
Okay?
yes, yes. So that's a very important point. I'm just acknowledging it. Yes?
So this means that a typical American will continue to practice my religion and be a civic resident and hold on to all of my identities and do the same thing I do every day as I've always done, but within a different awareness or a more open, greater awareness.
That's right, and I want to be very careful. You said do the same things I've been doing all along, but now with a new awareness. And that's, since we are as we mind, right? If it doesn't mean that I've been wasting a lot of paper and leaving the lights on and consuming money, and you know, when you wake up, there is a profound shift in the ethos of how you move in the world in sacred space. So it's, I would put it slightly differently. It's not that I have to stop being a Christian to be a global citizen, but in my new awareness, I can be more deeply Christian. I can be more deeply scientist. I can be more deeply artist. I hope it's clear the point that in this space, and Heidegger wrote on this, that in this space between I and the other, when I'm here and I am looking at the work of art, the Van Gogh painting, I go to the museum and I'm telling my friends, it's $3 million. Do you know what it cost? And so forth. I'm treating the artwork as an object. And Heidegger, when he wrote on the work of art, he was beginning to see, imagine encountering a work of art as a sacred object, as not an object, but an other. I see the Van Gogh painting, and I see the shoes of the farmer. And in that shoe, I can see the whole life of that person. The canvas is alive now. It's sacred. You see, so art, aesthetic experience in this space comes to life. This is those of you here who are giving workshops on art and transpersonal are exactly right. Poetry and art, because art understood is a very powerful music, a powerful transformer. If you could listen to the sound of Om, it will take you into that space. And this is where science happens now. The point I was making is that as long as we're just changing our lens from Newton to Einstein, and we're still locked here, we're doing ego-mental science. What would it take to be a scientist here? We know the great breakthrough of science is a capacity to dance and revise conservatively in light of the evidence of nature. But if we're locked in our lens with our particular theoretical framework Kant showed, we're not going to see the object as it really is. Whatever it is, cancer is caused by smoking, ADD, whatever it is we're looking at. Our lens is affecting what we see and the feedback. If we can open up to the evidence, I want to see my child as she is. I want to see my lover as she is. I want to see nature as it really is. Husserl was saying we've got to open up an epoche, the lens, to be a witness to the evidence. And that's where deep knowledge is. This is the place of double bracket knowledge and science. Science is not the same as science. The point I was making is all of our life has been dominated by this ego-mental technology, and it's as if this is a new Microsoft for the mind. This operating system isn't powerful enough to handle nature and the evidence, so that in EUROTAS, as we say, we know that the person is not just an object. That's a transpersonal self. We want to do psychotherapy to heal her. I presented this to psychotherapists last year in Chicago. And they saw, before I presented it, that when you're doing psychotherapy, if you could appeal to the high self and bring the broken selves into dialogue with that high self, you could bring the person to healing. And one girl tried to commit suicide. And they were using this in a video because there was a voice in her that wanted to say, kill yourself. Why? She was abused by an uncle, and her parents didn't intervene. She wanted to punish her parents by taking her life, to teach them a lesson. So that a voice fragment, once the child is stabilized in the high self that you know is there, you can appeal to that for dialogue. The therapist called out this voice from within the child to bring it into the open, the one that wanted to kill her. And in creating a dialogue, it saw, first of all, that it was trying to kill it to punish the parents. And the girl healed and gradually changed by appealing to the integral self to bring the fragments together. Very powerful. This, yes?
question. Do you think you need to have stability and integration at the lower levels before jumping up and down? Or, for example, in clinical psychology, some very fragmented patients come in. There needs to be a certain stability before touching some of the higher...
That's a great question. And I think, did you hear it? Does there need to be stability in the everyday self before you can qualify to go? Point one, we know all of our great teachers realized that you can't just blasé go into the light and open and dilate the third eye and the awakened mind. It's not life-threatening because it's life-giving, but you have to be prepared. You have to get the infrastructure. We know that people get Kundalini shock. If you open up too suddenly and you don't have the wherewithal to handle it, it can take you down. We need shock therapy for people. So Nagarjuna said that a little intelligence can be very dangerous. If the ego misuses this knowledge, it can bite you like a serpent and can be deadly. Right? So like a serpent wrongly grasped, if you grasp onto wisdom and you're not prepared. Plato said, when the philosopher breaks out of the cave, people are in the cave, we must go into the light, that's all philosophy, but it can blind you. So he had 15 years of mathematical training to get the mind ready, and then 15 years of moral training before you were qualified to even dare to open to the light of goodness itself and to get wisdom in the world. So all of the teachers warned us, don't look into the face of God, you'll be blinded. So we have to take that caution seriously to prepare yourself. On the other hand, if the stability is the wrong kind of stability, if it's a rigid, closed, authoritarian kind of stability, that destabilizes and blocks you. So what's the fine line between helping as a creative therapist to get the shattered self sufficiently integrated so that she can now begin to get on the path of a very challenging journey? Good question. And I think that EUROTAS, as I can hear, is holding that and experimenting with that avenue of transformation. Yes.
One of the subject matters I'm concerned about is terror. And I think I'd like to hear you speak about terror, but specifically, just now you spoke about rigidity and how rigidity can be used as a way of destabilizing. I'm wondering what your view of terror is relative to your model.
Good. Excellent question. What is terror? This gentleman is concerned about terror. And of course, we're in a war against terrorism. And I've been suggesting that if you cast your diagnostic eye too narrowly, which is to say, erase all of this, forget the double brackets, and just go into here. And you have a 9/11. We're starting over. This is all we have. And here's 9/11. The airplanes go in and down come the towers. And that unacceptable, life-threatening terrorism that comes from a form of ego-mentalism is fundamentalism. There are always polar forms here that can absolutism and relativism, unity and multiplicity. There is a polar split of two sides within this logic, and we tend not to see it. So that one side is fundamentalism, one form of ego-mentalism is fundamentalism. My truth is the only truth. And frankly, we could find that in academic circles as well. You know that, right? Academic people trained in their field are, in a way, fundamentalist scientists. That if you raise an alternative paradigm, they shoot it down because it's a kind of fundamentalism. So when you get the deeper diagnosis of ego-mentalism, then relativism is the flip side of fundamentalism. Fundamentalism saying, this is the absolute truth. I got it. Jesus, science, whatever it is. Relativism saying, there are many truths. It's all relative to whatever. There are multiple absolute, not just one absolute, many. You're African-American absolute, you're Latino, you're Eurocentric, you're Asian. You all have your truth, and truth is relative. Relativism and absolutism, two sides of the same coin. So that terrorism, when Bush said, here are the Islamic terrorists, we're going to have to go and take them out. He is using terror to fight terror. And an eye for an eye is going to make the whole world blind, as Gandhi said. So the question for me and for all of us is, what would be the only future politics, power politics, to deal with the terrorism and the broken lives and chronic battles we have? We've got to have to go to dialogue, deeper, real dialogue. Not ego-log, not working out a power play, that a détente at Camp David. It says, now we got a détente here, you know, on paper. But the hearts of the people are still broken and then angry and they're not reconciled in forgiveness, what this is about. What would it take to make real peace in the Middle East? What would it take to cleanse the soul of Germany or America, right? So when Martin Luther King said, I have a dream, he got to the mountaintop and he said, I may not get there with you, but there's an America coming where white man and black man, Gentile and Jew would be together like brothers, right? And he got shot. He didn't mean the single bracket America that's caught here. That America is over. That's a broken America. Why? Because there's a war between unity and multiplicity. If it's a multicultural society, then it's relative to your truths. The civic space is broken. It has no unity, no common ground. And if democracy is we the people have the power, and there's no we, but just a bunch of scattered factions counting ballots in power plays, democracy is gone. The civic space is a sacred space for democracy where there can be unity in diversity. That requires a higher logic. On the American penny, it says, e pluribus unum. Out of the many, one. So the unity, double bracket unity, is not the same as single bracket unity. And I hope you see there's been a war from the time of Heraclitus to Derrida. There's been a pendulum spiral, and it doesn't spiral very well, between, remember Heraclitus said before Socrates, there's only becoming, all is in flux, everything is changing, there is no being, no unity, just difference. Parmenides said there's only being. Being is eternal. There is no becoming. That's an illusion. That's Socrates came in the scene and says, wait a minute, there is truth. That's how do we figure it out? Is it being or becoming? We haven't answered that yet. So we've moved now. Where are we living now? Postmodernism. What is that? The rejection of modernism. What is modernism? It's the view, like the founding of America, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all persons are created equal and endowed by the Creator by inalienable rights. That's modernism coming from the European Enlightenment of Locke and Descartes. That's over. Give up on unity. There is no fundamental truth. What do we have? Postmodern deconstruction, diversity, pluralism, difference, différence, according to Derrida. We only have différence. So difference rules over unity. If it's only difference, what are you going to get? Moral nihilism. Why? Because there's no fundamental unifying law. The culture is in trouble. So how do you fight terrorism? This is the question of our conference. If terrorism comes deeply from ego-mental life, one way or the other, then the way to get out of terrorism is to go into compassion. And that requires a deep faith and courage to do dialogue, real dialogue. That's why I call that deep dialogue, not monologue, right, and power plays, but touching. So you're pro-choice, I'm pro-life. I believe that abortion is murder. I can't get away from that. You believe that choice is an ultimate human right and freedom. You can't mess with freedom. How do we deal with that? Do I set off bombs? Terrorism? Or do we find a way to say, maybe if we go deeper, we'll see that the right of the choice of the fetus is a choice also. So life is choice and choice is life. Let's shake hands and find another way. When you go to common ground, what seems split and broken lower, like is it Big Bang or is it Genesis? And you go into the deep space of the infinite word, let there be light, and you realize that is the Big Bang. So Genesis and Big Bang can meet in the common ground. We don't have to kill each other. Is it Jesus or is it Buddha? Go into the... So that's really what it seems to me our challenge. Can we have the courage to go dialogue into the deep common ground? Is there common ground? Or are we just broken into pieces on the planet? Our future is turning on this point. Yes? Oh, is your hand up? No. Thank you so much. Great questions. I wish you had more time. You're here very late.